Welcome to another Troubadour show. Today we're going to be talking about the duel between Paris and Menelaus in the Iliad. And we're going to particularly be looking at the translation that I put together for you, which is particularly if you're a first-time reader of the Iliad. For many years, I have wanted the best book for the Iliad for first-time readers. And so I didn't find one that was the best, so I created it. Now, I will tell you that there's a lot of wonderful translations out there, but this one is the best for first-timers. But what we're going to do today is we're going to look at chapter 3. So you can just take this chapter by itself with me, or book 3. Or you can go through the series with me. I'm doing a whole series on all 24 books. And I hope you'll check this out. You'll go to troubadour.studio/Iliad to get my version of this and follow along as we go through this. And you'll learn a lot about the Iliad, about ancient Greek literature, and about Western literature and its impact to us today. That is always my stance, is how Western literature has influenced the world, influenced us if you live and are born in the West or want to go to the West, and how it's all comes from the Greek. As we've discussed in books or chapters 1 and 2, we have Achilles and Agamemnon. They have a conflict, a quarrel in chapter 1. In chapter 2, we have like a roll call of all the Greek soldiers. And then in this chapter, we have a close-up. So I'm giving it cinematic terms here because there is something kind of cinematic about the way that Homer writes. And this is, I think, very important. So in chapter 2, we get a sense of the vast horde of Greeks that came across the Mediterranean. If you're a filmmaker, one way that you would do this is you would have wide shots of the landscape with thousands and thousands of Greek soldiers landing on the shores of Troy. And that's what they did in the movie Troy. The image that Troy used of all the ships, the Greek ships coming to Troy, and it's like on a blank ocean, and it's just littered with hundreds. I think all you can see is a couple hundred, but I think the implication, because it goes off into the vast distance, is that it's thousands of ships. And then it hones in on a particular ship. And you see that there's like 50 to 100 men on each ship. And then they land, and then you get this wide shot. That's kind of what chapter 2 is doing with the Iliad. That's what Homer's trying to do, except he's just using epic poetry and words. He doesn't have a camera, right? And now chapter 3, we get a close-up. I'm ready for my close-up, Mr. DeMille. And this is where you get some descriptions of Agamemnon and Ajax and Odysseus and a couple other people, and Helen and Priam, the king of Troy. So you get close-ups. This is Homer bringing you into the story more before the action really kicks off. So we have our inciting incident, if you're a writer, which is the quarrel between Achilles and Agamemnon. And then we have the consequences. Now they're going to go to war. In chapter 2, they're getting ready for the battle, I should say. And then chapter 3 is them preparing for the actual fight. Now, in my translation, I have provided these little sections at the beginning to kind of explain to you what's going to happen in that chapter. And then at the beginning of each section, because this is written in verse, so it is iambic pentameter, but I included these sections to help you understand it in prose. So just a little sentence just to kind of help prime you to what's going on. In my translation, I have 6 sections. We have the Trojans march to meet their enemy. That's section 1. Paris's cowardice and Hector's rebuke. A duel is proposed to end the war. Helen and Priam witness the duel preparations. The duel of Paris and Menelaus. Lastly, Agamemnon demands Helen's return. So we're going to go through this section by section, and I'm going to give you a Greek word of the day that I think will help you understand the world that you live in a little bit more, because it's the root of a word that you've probably used before. Let's begin with the Trojans march to meet their enemy. So we're going to go through each of these sections. I'm going to read a little passage. For this first section, I did want to do a kind of x-ray on the section itself. We're not going to do this throughout the whole book. It would take too long. But I want to kind of give you a sense of some of the things that are embedded in the story and how I tried to bring them out in my translation. And I hope you'll find it enjoyable and you'll learn a little bit about writing and about, Western tradition and things that Homer was expecting his audience to know and that you probably don't know. At least I didn't when I read this stuff. Here's the first little stanza here, or two stanzas. The Trojans marched ahead with warlike cries, like birds in flight that screech beneath the skies. They moved like cranes that flee from winter's chill and soar above the rivers, strong and swift, to bring the Pygmies war and deadly strife. The Greeks, by contrast, marched in silent ranks, their hearts all burning, eager for the fight. As fog rolls thick across a mountain's peak, concealing all that thieves might spy in stealth, so thick the dust arose beneath their feet, as silently they swept across the field. Now, in my translation, I took a few slight liberties to help make it more readable and comprehensive to a modern audience. If you're curious, write a comment and I will go into them more. The first thing I wanted to point out here is something, one, you do not need to know to enjoy the story, but I think will add a little bit of your understanding and appreciation for what Homer is doing here. And that is this reference to the cranes and the Trojans, and then the Pygmies and what they're trying to do. And there's a couple things that are happening here. So one, if you just read it, it's your first time and it's your introduction to mythology and Greek mythology, all you need to see is that the Trojans are loud and aggressive. They're like these screeching birds up in the sky. And the Greeks are silent. And I often think of this as like they're silent and efficient and they're killing machines, then they're going out to war. And there's a contrast that Homer is clearly trying to make you see. And he even gives you two, this is called an extended simile. He gives you two images, the cranes, the birds for the Trojans. They're screeching over the air. They're going to slaughter the Pygmies. And the contrast is the Greeks, whose dust from their feet is creating a kind of fog. And the comparison is to a thief. So we have those two contrasts. We have the Greeks are kind of like the thieves coming and they're being shrouded by this dust. And then you have the screeching birds that are the Trojans. So what's going on with this crane pygmy thing? That's what I wanted to kind of focus on for a second. You probably don't know what that is. I didn't. If you do, good for you. The Greeks at the time all would know the reference between cranes and the slaughter of the Pygmies. This was a prominent view. You could see this on vase work of the ancient Greeks. This was stories being told all the time. There was this traditional story of these pygmy men, and pygmies are what you think of them. They're like fist-sized men is what it kind of means. If they're small, like a foot and a half or something like that. They're tiny little men, and they live in caves. Even Aristotle wrote about them in the History of Animals. His book on animals, he actually references the cranes fighting the pygmies, and he says it's true. Now, it's not true, of course. There's no pygmies like this. At least there's no evidence. We do have evidence. We have some evidence of small humans, for sure, like 3-foot humans from millions of years ago. Maybe that's, or hundreds of thousands of years ago. Maybe that's what this is reference to. So the cranes in mythology often fought the pygmies. Everybody knew this story. It's whenever the cranes go on their migration, their regular migration, they fight with the pygmies, and it's a life or death situation. So what is Homer trying to do with this mythology? Well, one is he's always evoking these kinds of images that the Greeks would have known. Someone today in a modern novel saying it's a David and Goliath. And what that will do, if you're writing, let's say you're just reading a thriller by Michael Connelly or something, and he says it's a David, he was like David and the other was like Goliath. You get an image instantly, even if you're not Christian, by the way. I'll point that out. It's canonical. So you will think, okay, David, small guy, Goliath, big, strong man. David's got a slingshot. He's going to take out the big, strong man. So it's a David and Goliath story. And you see this in news articles all the time. That is an ancient story, David and Goliath, that you recognize. And it's the same thing that Homer's doing here, the cranes and the pygmies. And it's not necessarily, although there may be some of this, a reference to the smallness of the Greeks. I don't think that's what Homer's really doing here. What I think he's doing is he's adding flavor and giving you images to work with about the kind of thing that's happening, which is the Trojan War is put into this mythological space. So it's a historical moment for the Greeks, but it's put in conjunction with all these grand, exotic, the cranes and the pygmies are at the edges of the universe, the edges of the world, where the stream meets Oceanus that surrounds the entire world, which no one has been to. It's just something they know of, or no one alive has been to. It's mythological creatures have been to it. So all of this adds a lot of flavor to this story and kind of gets you excited, like, oh, the pygmies, it's the David and Goliath story. Yeah, I love that story. That's kind of what's happening here. And then you have this image of the Greeks stealing away from the Trojans, which is a really interesting thing to think about. We're going to talk a little bit more about this today, about the feeling that Homer is trying to generate about the Trojans, even though he's a Greek writing to Greeks. And he's giving them a sense of not just, we love the Greeks and the Greeks are the best and the most wonderful, and the Trojans are evil and we want to kill all of them. That's not what he's trying to do. He's trying to give you a sense of the whole thing. And in this moment, he's actually comparing the Greeks to thieves. Now, here's the word that he uses. And this is your Greek word of the day. The word is klepti. 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 It can be pronounced, you might hear it pronounced klepte, but klepti, klepte. But this is where you get the word kleptomaniac, and it means to steal, thief. That's what he uses. And he literally uses that word, klepti, to refer to the Greeks in this moment. So he's calling the Greeks or referencing them as thieves, even though he's a Greek writing to Greeks, talking to Greeks. So I think it's really important that that is built into Greek and overall Western literature, which is this idea of not simply looking at one side as the good guys overall, but both sides have some good, even though Homer is on the side of the Greeks overall, but he doesn't necessarily always say that everything they do is good. And that, I think, is an important part of literature, is the objective analysis or overview of all sides. And that's something very Western. And other cultures do this to some degree, but they do it differently. And we could talk about this with something like Indian tales like Mahabharata. But okay, so let's focus on the rest of this. Again, I'm not going to do that deep of an analysis for every stanza, but I wanted you to get a sense of this. The next section is Paris's Cowardice and Hector's Rebuke. In here, we have Paris is going to challenge Menelaus, the husband of Helen, who Paris, remember, abducted, or she went away with him, which either way doesn't really matter because still he stole her. And Hector then, who's the brother of Paris, the greatest of the Trojan warriors, he attacks verbally Paris. And this is what he says. I'm not going to read the whole section, just one little stanza here. You crossed the seas with faithful friends and stole another's wife from her far distant land, the wife of one who knows the ways of war. You've brought disaster to your father's house, to all of Troy, and joy to all our foes. But shame upon yourself. Will you not stand and face brave Menelaus in the field? So Hector is saying, we're all fighting for you. This is all your fault. You should challenge Menelaus to a duel. And, it's the things I want to point out here is not only did you steal the wife of a man, you stole the wife of war-loving Menelaus and his brother, war-loving Agamemnon, and the war-loving Greeks. So you brought this war on us by, bringing on this type of person to our shores. They are war-loving. And you brought shame and disaster to yourself and to your people. And we've talked about the dishonor, the honor, shame culture that we're living in with the Homeric text. And we still have a kind of shame culture to some degree in the West. It's not completely gone, but it's really present in a lot of this of like shame is now going to cause Paris to act outside of his nature. That was Paris's Cowardice and Hector's Rebuke. In the next section, a duel is proposed to end the war. So in this section, Paris is going to challenge Menelaus. Now, I'm just going to read a small little snippet of what Paris says to Hector in response to what Hector just said. Hector, your words are just but harsh indeed. Your heart is like an axe in strength and force that cuts through wood and makes the wielder strong. Your mind is bold and never knows defeat. But do not mock the gifts the gods bestow. No man can cast aside what they impart, nor claim these treasures by his will alone. This, along with the extended simile of the cranes and the pygmies and other things, is also Homer showing the inevitability of all of this, and that it's not really Paris in a certain sense. It really is the gods. And it's really striking and something very Greek. Do not mock the gifts the gods bestow. And we'll see this again later. I want to bring it up again later when we meet Helen and Aphrodite together. But Paris is telling Hector here, look, dude, I'm beautiful. Women love me. Aphrodite is my patron, my patroness. Don't be mad, bro. I got the girl. And that's just how things are meant to be. It's not my fault. The gods wanted it this way. Now, I think there's more to the story, and he probably is a little bit his fault because he chose Aphrodite. But the Greeks have a sense that there are multiple, remember, they're pagans, there's multiple gods, and it's not just some one divine plan, but it's different gods vying for different things, and they give different traits to people. So Paris has given agreement to do this duel. Hector announces it to the Greeks and the Trojans. They're all sitting down waiting to hear this. Now they're going to prepare for the duel. In the next section, Helen and Priam witness the duel preparations. What I wanted to focus on was actually some of the close-up mentality I was talking about at the beginning here. I'm ready for my close-up Mr. DeMille, if you've heard that term in cinema history. We're going to look at Priam and Helen and Ajax, and we're going to get a little bit of a snippet of their character, what they look like, how other people experience them and see them. And Homer's going to try to help us see these characters. One thing I wanted to point out about this that I often get when I teach this, which is, why is Priam and Helen talking about the Greek warrior leaders at the final year, the 9th, 10th year of the war? Why did they wait this long to talk about them? It doesn't make sense. Why did Paris not challenge Menelaus to a duel to end the war? By the way, that's the whole point of this duel, is to end the war. Whoever wins the duel gets Helen. And if Menelaus wins, he gets her back and the Greeks go home. If Paris wins, then Helen goes with Paris and the Greeks go home. So why did they do this right away? And the answer is pretty obvious, because it's literature. In today's world of writing fiction, it's called exposition. You're trying to expose, to teach, to help the audience understand where we are and the characters involved in these stories. At this time in storytelling, the kind of realism that we expect today is not exactly the same as it was back then. So there wasn't the expectation that everything be exactly super hyper logical in every way that it worked. So it is very true that it doesn't make any real sense that in a 10-year war, they would wait till the end. Although I will give a little bit of defense of this in the sense that it's possible that you have these animosities and things going on behind the scenes. And because there's at loggerheads for so long, both sides do come up with a new tactic to finish the war and, kind of come. I think there is a kind of sense to that. And you can say things like, maybe Priam was too distracted for 9 years to I don't. You can make some statements about why Priam didn't ask Helen who those people are, why the Trojans have no idea about who their enemies are for 10 years when they're right there. It's not like we're talking about an intergalactic war where people are fighting from different planets and like who's fighting who, I don't know. Like they're right there. So, how are they not? It's pretty silly from a realistic standpoint. But again, it's literature and it's early literature. And it's just, this is Homer's way of conveying this information about these different characters. And I think I think he does a really good job. Just kind of let that go. There's a suspension of disbelief, as Samuel Taylor Coleridge called it, that you just have to sometimes accept certain structures, things that you wouldn't in real life. Poetic license, they call it. So I want to give you a couple of these close-ups. Again, you can check out my translation so you can have your first great read of the Iliad, or even if you've read the Iliad, I think you'll really enjoy this translation. I think it'll be a smooth read and just very enjoyable while still being the Iliad. So here's a snippet. Now Priam sat among his wisest men. The elders were too old now to fight, yet sharp in mind. They gathered by the gate to watch the war, too frail for battle, yet wise in counsel still. Like crickets in the trees, their voices rose, soft-spoken, but with wisdom in their tone. I always think it's helpful to compare, to think about. So Priam is going to be compared to a couple of people throughout the story. Later on, he'll be compared to Achilles' aged father. But the only old person we really have so far is Nestor, the aged Greek man, who's also an advisor. He's also wise, but he does actually engage in a kind of warlikeness as well. That's a big difference between the elders of Troy and the elders of Greek. The older Greek people do seem to maybe get involved in battle a little bit. And, there's a question, and including the kings. So Priam himself does not fight, but all the kings on the Greek side, they are all kings and they fight. So there is, I think, something interesting being shown about the different cultures of Troy, which is not a warlike or war-loving culture, and Greece, which is a war-loving culture. And that, I think, is important to the understanding of the story. And when they saw fair Helen on the walls, they murmured low in wonder and surprise. No wonder Greeks and Trojans fight for her. She shines as brightly as a goddess would. Yet even so, it's best she goes with them and end this war, which brings us only pain. So Helen is the bringer of pain. She's the cause of war, just like Paris is the cause of war. But these elders are saying, like, she is so beautiful. Well, we kind of get it, right? That's pretty interesting, right? Someone is so beautiful. It's like, all right, I can understand why thousands of men are dying for this woman. Priam, the wise aged man, the wise aged Trojan, says to Helen, "Come sit by me, dear child, and see the field. Look at your former husband and his kin. I do not blame you for this bitter war. The gods have burdened us with grief and woe." Priam doesn't actually blame Helen, just like Paris was saying, look, I am just bestowed with beauty and women flock to me, and I fell in love. I'm a man of love, and Helen is a woman of love. We were struck by Aphrodite. Remember, Aphrodite is the mother of Cupid or Eros. And we were just struck by that, and we couldn't help ourselves. You can't blame us for the gifts that were given. Now, here's the next close-up. So we had a close-up of Priam, a close-up of Helen. The next close-up is Priam, the king of Troy, is looking out and he sees this man. And he says, "Now tell me, Helen, who that man may be, that mighty Greek who stands above the rest. Though many here are taller, none I've seen look more like kings with such a noble grace." And then Helen later responds, "That man is Agamemnon. He's brother to the man I once called mine, the husband whom I left for Paris's love." So we get a little snippet of Agamemnon. He's taller than the rest, and he's got the stature of a king. Priam praises him. "How blessed you are, Agamemnon." And he goes on to all these things that Agamemnon has, not only the men who follow him, which is the sign of a great king, but also his physical stature. And then the old king, Priam, saw Odysseus standing there and asked, "Now tell me, child, who is this man? He's shorter than the mighty Agamemnon, yet broader in his shoulders and his chest. Though armor lies beside him on the ground, he walks among the troops like some great ram that moves within a flock of snowy sheep." So he's a leader of the sheep. He's a ram among sheep. That, of course, is Odysseus. And Helen says, "That is Odysseus, famed for clever plans. His mind is sharp and full of cunning thoughts." Now, what happens here with Odysseus is so famed. He's like Achilles in the sense that he's so renowned that one of the other elders, Antenor, stands up, wise and calm, and spoke up. And he says this about Odysseus. Like he's compelled to say something about the greatness of Odysseus. And he says, "You speak the truth, for I recall them well. When he and Menelaus came to Troy, sent as ambassadors because of you, I welcomed them and learned to know them both. While standing, Menelaus seemed to tower, a man broad-chested, taller than the rest. But seated, Odysseus seemed more grand in form. And when they spoke, the difference was clear. For Menelaus spoke in words so swift, with few but sharp and clear, a man of sense. But when Odysseus rose to speak his mind, he stood with eyes cast down upon the ground, and held his scepter still as if unsure. You'd think him slow or lacking in his words. But when he spoke, his voice was rich and strong, like winter snow that falls in swirling flakes. No man could match the power of his words, and none remembered then his looks at all. So Antenor, one of the Trojan wise men, old wise men, praises Odysseus for his words. Now this is clearly Homer's love of Odysseus. Homer has a love for Achilles as well as for Odysseus. How do we know this? Because he's got a whole book for one and a whole book for the other. The Odyssey is the book of Odysseus, and it's all about his cunningness, his tricks of mind and use of words, that he is a man who uses words. A poet would probably see some value in that. But what I think is really important in the Greek sense is that not only does the poet value words, so I value words, but I'll be honest, I struggle to get other people in the culture who don't already value words highly to value words. But throughout all the Greek culture, everyone had a deeper love of words like this. And I think Odysseus being a hero is actually a part of that. Now, I'm not going to go through all the descriptions of all the close-ups. There's Ajax, there's a few other people that are mentioned, but I did want to point out one really important part here, which is the pathos, the sympathy, the empathy that Homer is building into his story and into his characters. So after Helen talks about Ajax, she says these lines. Now, all the other Greeks I clearly see, and know them well by name and face alike. But I can't see my brothers, Castor strong, the horseman, and Polydeuces the brave, both born to me by the same loving mother. I wonder if they stayed behind in Greece, or if they sailed but will not fight today, ashamed of all the pain that I have caused. And that's the end of Helen's speech. And then it's Homer, the narrator, who says, thus Helen spoke, though they lay far away, for in their homeland they lay in their graves. This is a story told to a Greek audience. Helen is the cause of death and war, and she's a hated person. But Homer still gives us a moment, a tender, sympathetic moment to look into her soul and be empathetic, to feel how she might feel. That, again, is a very strongly built upon Western literary tradition of taking characters and digging into their psyche, digging into their soul, understanding them, not only how they look, how people perceive them, like how the old men perceive them, how the Trojans perceive them. All these different people perceive them in different ways, but how they perceive themselves, right? So she says that she is cause of war. She is shamed. She says that her brothers aren't there. Her assumption, which is not true, is that they're not there because they're ashamed of her who has the cause of this war. But then the narrator does something powerful, which is reveal the truth. They're buried in their homeland. She doesn't know that. That makes us a little sad for her. That's all. You can picture her there on the walls of Troy with Priam, who sympathizes with her himself. So we have a kind of person that we connect with literarily, artistically, which is Priam, who doesn't blame her for everything. She's not just this evil caricature. And then we have a little interiority of her where you could see her kind of looking out for her brothers. She can't find them. And then the narrator reveals why. Because they're dead. Now, my contention is that this is the beginning of great art in the world, but particularly in the West. And this becomes a tradition of these different perspectives, of this different approach to looking at a person through all different angles, as well as looking at the interior and the exterior. That's something very Western. Now, I don't want to claim that no other culture does this. That does happen in other cultures that I've seen. But I do claim that it does not happen to this extent and this early. That this was a big, massive moment of that happening and being accepted as happening throughout all of history. Now, in the Duel of Paris and Menelaus, we have an actual description of the battle between the two. So they do fight for a while. I'll let you go to troubadour.studio/Iliad to buy my version to read this. So I don't want to read every little bit of this story, but it's an exciting little moment where they fight for a little while. At the end of the duel, Menelaus is pulling Hector by his helmet toward the Greeks. He's going to kill him and he's about to die. And this is the important part that happens here. Then Menelaus leapt and grabbed the crest that dangled from the helmet on his foe. He dragged him back toward the Greek front line, a strap beneath his chin held firm and tight. And Menelaus might have claimed his life had not the goddess Aphrodite seen. She swiftly broke the strap that held the helm. The empty helmet came away in hand. Then Paris vanished, cloaked in mist by her. The goddess hid him in a veil unseen and placed him in his fragrant room at home. Paris is saved by the powers of Aphrodite. Now, it's often mentioned about what is the role of the gods in the story. It's often portrayed as, well, these gods are actually not super and attached to the actual action of the humans, of the mortals, except for a few couple scenes like that one where there's a direct intervention. But the interventions are important, and it's more than that. These gods, to the Homer and to the Greeks of the time, are very real, they're very poignant, they're very powerful, and they do act. Paris is brought to his home. Aphrodite, then the goddess of love, then goes to Helen and says, you need to come with me and go make love to Paris, essentially. And Helen says, deceitful goddess, why do you tempt me so? You took me from my home and brought me here, and now you come to steal me once again? Why trick me into this? Has Paris lost and Menelaus come to take me home? Is that why you appear to stay his hand? Go sit beside him, but be his wife yourself, and leave the path of gods for mortal men. And she goes on and kind of criticizes Aphrodite. And then Aphrodite, who's the goddess of love, but she's still a goddess. But Aphrodite, filled with rage, replied, do not provoke me, Helen. Do not dare. If you defy me now, I'll hate you more than ever I have loved you. And I'll bring the wrath of Trojans and the Greeks on you, and you will die a bitter, painful death. In the last section, Agamemnon then demands Helen's return. He says that they won this fight, therefore they should get Helen and then they'll go home. So that's what it's a kind of cliffhanger here. Like, are the Trojans going to do this? Now, of course, we reading this know they're not going to. Something's going to happen. Something's going to intervene. But what's going to happen? What's going to intervene? That's the question. That's why we're sticking around. That is an overview of chapter 3 of the Iliad by Homer. I hope you'll check out my translation, which is for first-time readers. I gave you some snippets of this so you can get an appreciation, and I hope this will help you either write a paper, understand the story better, whatever you want to do. But the Greek stories are so intriguing, so interesting. They have kept our attention for thousands of years, and I hope that you'll give it a chance to keep your attention for a little while as well. So go to troubadour.studio/Iliad and get your copy today. See you next time.